Hello everybody, it's the Alco Diesel Guy with another review for you. Today it's going to be this Dash 8 BHW from Atlas in N scale. Let's get right to it. As you can see, the locomotive is brand new in box. It's got the packaging still around it, bubble wrap and all. Let's get the box open for you. And these all come like this from the stock for those of you not familiar with N scale. Let's carefully get this out of here. This is, I should also note, a DCC and sound ready unit. The decoder is very easy to install. I'll get into that more of that later. First impressions, of course, are very excellent. The detailing is very well done here. Very sharp paint job. Did a good job of accentuating, I can't pronounce that right, accentuating the huge radiator grills in the back, which are common on the Dash 8s because of the bigger 7FDL prime mover. Even though these particular units were equipped with a 12-cylinder version of that power plant, they still had the same radiators. These were generally rated 3,200 horsepower, but they made less, as I understand it, because they had an alternator placed inside, behind the cab, I believe it is, that took some of the power off the prime mover and turned it into HEP power for the coaches being pulled. This got rid of the annoying need to have the prime mover spin at full speed to turn a HEP power generator, but at the same time rob power from the engine. Although I think the HEP power generator did the same. Along to the back here. My camera will cooperate. Sorry about that, folks. This thing is such a pain. See, we have the rear marker lights and headlights. Unfortunately, we find that they're not functional in this model, even though I've heard mixed reports about them being functional. See, they're just painted red. The headline on the top is functional, and that does work. I see detailing here the MU cables, as we see, are not plastic molded, much like the previous generation of this locomotive. Onto the side to the front here. Excellent job on the paint scheme. Let me actually get these guys out of here so you can see the job I did. This, again, is the new phase, I believe it is 5 from Amtrak. This is the current paint scheme these engines wear. I'm going to just do a little trick here with my... Don't like to use metal products around plastic. I'm going to use my sponger here and just poke it and pop it up. There we go. There we go. See, the logo is very nicely done. Paint is excellent. Onto the front again. The sunshades are not installed. They come in a little plastic bag. Again, very nicely done front. You see the number 509 is in place. Another nice little feature are these ditch lights, which do come on in analog mode and can be activated or initiated, I should say, on DCC with function 6, and yes, do engage in flashing when you blow the horn. Here's the other side again. Let me go do a little chicanery here to get this out of here. Very tight fit. It goes. I am definitely a fan of these engines. I always like the Amtrak Dash 8. Something you don't see very much, especially on the East Coast. Or at least you didn't, although now if you take the auto train, you'll see them because they use them as switchers. Large of these engines have been retired from pulling trains. They used to be used very heavily around the Midwest area, mainly around Michigan, the old Michigan line, around the border between Chicago, around the Michigan border between there, I believe around there, which is between there and Canada, and around the Chicago area. They were seen frequently, as well as on the West Coast a bit. These have since been moved from that assignment because they don't have the proper equipment to run at high speeds. I forgot what the technology is called they need, but that equipment was not installed on these engines, and obviously these engines being as old as they were, Amtrak didn't invest in them. They did, however, interestingly enough, put the P32s, pardon me, 42s. Those are equipped with that equipment, and they are used now on those lines. It's understandable why also Amtrak didn't do it, as they're getting new Siemens engines in. And here's another shot of the front. As you can see, again, just to make it very clear, these do not light up, which is unfortunate. Okay, I now have this locomotive on my test track. Since this is DCC ready, the only way it's going to run is if I actually put it there and run it as such. So let's go ahead and give this thing a shot and see how well it does. Turning the power on. Might help if I actually put the power of the surge protector of my power strip on here. There we go. And if I push the plug in a little bit further, there we go. Oop, took off on me. Runs pretty well, but you notice it's hesitating a bit, and it sounds like it's dragging. In this case, it actually sounds like the gears are stripping. Oh, yes, they are. Ooh, that's bad. Oh, and those ditch lights actually do work. My apologies. They do actually work on this engine. Unfortunately, the running habits are pretty bad. That is terrible. The gears are clearly stripped on this one. Something is wrong, that's for sure. Oh yes, look at this truck here. It's actually freewheeling. That is pretty disturbing. Yeah. It's not exactly a great start to this engine's life with me. Looks like this is actually freewheeling. Which tells me the truck is probably not sitting on the chassis correctly. The front truck does appear to be locked tight. So that's not exactly a great start to this locomotive. And unfortunately, this is not the only flaw these engines have. So in a second, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about, as well make my way over to my layout so I can better show you what the issue is here. Okay, we are now on my still in work in progress layout. As you can see, I'm still working on several different locomotives. And I want to give you a preview of that engine that was sitting there. Something else I'm actually working on. And we have a different engine, number 503, set up on the tracks. This is one of the engines equipped with sound. You'll notice something unusual about this locomotive if I zoom in close to it. And I'll explain why that is in a little bit. But first, let's go over the sound performance of these locomotives. Start this thing up right here. Pardon me for slipping you out of frame there for a second. Sound is kind of weak on these engines, surprisingly. Let's now go to the front. Again, this is the DCC and sound version of this. This has ESU lock sound and has their direct decoder slot in it. Let's go and get a light on here. Have a horn and give her a run. They did get the horn right on this, which is very nice. I don't know how to turn the HEP power on this thing, unless I like to hear the engine chug. We take off right now and zoom out a little bit. And away we go. Now, the sound is kind of weak on this particular example. It is decent. I like the sound quality. I like the chugging noise GEs make. As close to an Alco as you can get without actually owning an Alco. See, I have it hooked up to a set of Kato coaches. This engine's already been broken in. Let's see if I can gently accelerate her up. Again, this is an ESU low sound decoder, so it has excellent motor control on it. I'll gently accelerate her up to speed for you. Take her up to about 50 some odd percent there. Pardon my finger being in the shot. Sound is definitely something to behold on these engines if you listen to it chug along there. Excellent running locomotive. Makes all the curves, doesn't get hung up on anything. Or so it seems. Let me show you exactly why this locomotive is able to not have these issues that I was just mentioning that it doesn't have. And the reason for the unusual bodgery that I've engaged in on this engine. Let me power it down a little bit here as we come up to the front. Now, for those of you who didn't catch it before, I'll show you. Let me actually go a little bit further forward. I've had to make an unusual modification to this locomotive. It's drastic and not drastic at the same time, but also quite comical. And yes, if you stare at the bottom of the locomotive, you are right. There is no fuel tank. Now, you're probably all wondering exactly why I would need to take the fuel tank off on this engine. Well, there's a very good reason for it. Alrighty, so we have the engine on the tracks right now. Not the same one, number 509, I should say, on the tracks right now with the fuel tank. And if you look very carefully, there is a major issue. Can you see that? The fuel tank is literally touching the tracks. So when I attempt to run one of these engines with the fuel tank, it creates some serious issues. And I'll demonstrate that to you in just a second here. So 503 is now back on the tracks. Let's go fire her up again and see how it works with the fuel tank. Love doing that. So I'm going to get the ditch lights on this thing. There they go. F6 turns the ditch lights on. And you can see, before I even so much as get the engine going, it can't move anywhere. So you're probably wondering what's going on here. No, I didn't stop the throttle, but I'll show you. I'll throttle it all the way up again. And you hear the wheels are spinning, but the engine isn't moving. So your first response is what gives. Well, it's really quite simple. Let me actually just shut the engine down. I'll show you. Put it on mute mode because I don't want to go through all the procedures in that. As you can see, it is stuck thoroughly, but if we look very carefully at the bottom here, and I'll get a little bit extra light so we can see it. Oops, sorry, this darn thing is annoying. Let me actually use my other light here. There we go. There is absolutely, again, no clearance on the bottom whatsoever between the rails and the fuel tank itself. So as a result, the train becomes perched on anything resembling a rough joint in the tracks. This is kind of a uni-track, so we're not even talking about bad track here necessarily. This is some pretty decent track. It can be somewhat quirky, but not like that. Now, those of you who are going to be saying, as I always do, and my fellow YouTuber Sam's Trains has encountered this as well, hey, well, you need to upgrade your track Alco diesel guy. That might be so, but I'll tell you something. The previous model of this locomotive doesn't have this issue, A, and B, this particular fuel tank is not photorealistic at all. Now, I know a lot of you out there at this point are probably streaming at your monitors and or phones, tablets, etc., saying, Alco Diesel Guy, that's your fault, you should have done a better job with your tracks. Well, to be honest, it really is the fuel tank's fault in this case. Again, if you look at the real-life version of this locomotive, and I'll put a public domain image, there is definitely space between the fuel tank and the rails, much more than we have here. Here, it's pretty much riding right against the tracks. The reason for this space, well, is actually a pretty good one that Atlas most likely decided to go with a bigger fuel tank, although they should have done their homework. I'll demonstrate right here. So as you see, I've now removed the actual fuel tank itself, and what we have is this strange rectangular square, black rectangular square, I should say, and what this is actually is a speaker. It's actually mounted right here, in this case in the locomotive, and here's your proof it actually grabbed a screw and actually stuck to it. The reason for the big tank, therefore, at least in my opinion, was to help the sound out, and while it may do that job, it is so overwhelmingly high profile that it will not allow the train to clear anything, because again, it takes up all the space between the base of the locomotive and the actual tracks. Now, this is a clear glaring issue with quality control that Atlas should have caught before they put this locomotive out and was testing it, but apparently no one did their homework and checked it. So again, the only way to make this work, and if you'll see here, is to take the fuel tank off, because once I do that, there is enough clearance for it to make. In fact, this is actually almost prototypical at this point. I think I should also note, those of you saying, well, the previous model was like this, maybe I should be used to this by now. Actually, no. This is from one of the previous runs. Again, that run started in 2003, if I remember correctly, had the earlier lens decoder on those. Then it was reissued with new numbers, same road names, with an NCE decoder, DCC ready, not sound equipped, of course. And if we see here, the fuel tank is noticeably lower on the profile, and it does have a gap. You can just see the railroad ties, as there is definitely a gap between the fuel tank and the tracks itself. Again, going back to our -8 Amtrak B32, it is right against the actual track itself. There is no room at all for it to go. So that's a big issue. The end result, this engine bottoms out and catches everything like you saw it getting perched before. It's not clear as to why this happened, but again, the guess I have is the fact that, as I showed you before, the speaker's in place and Atlas wanted to give a little more space for this, but apparently no one again at Atlas was watching the quality control, as seemingly demonstrated with my other model, number 507, I believe that was. Pardon me, 509 that I tested, which of course I found the rear truck is stripped out. And just to be as precise as I can be, here's an earlier version of the Atlas N-Scale-8 in Amtrak paint, specifically the PepsiCan scheme. This one was from 2003 with the old school decoder from Lens, and as we can see, there is a noticeable gap between the fuel tank and the rails. So bottom line, I really wanted to like this locomotive. I really, really wanted to enjoy it. But unfortunately, I can't. The reason being is that it just isn't capable of making it around my track without bottoming out and stalling out. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to probably say. It's, hey, why don't you just get over it, redo your tracks, adjust that, make it work as it should, because I've got one of these engines and it runs fine. Well, more power to you if you do have a railroad where this works fine. But here's my point. You go out and you treat yourself to a luxury car and you drive over a pothole. And unfortunately, the engine somehow or other drops out of the frame. You have it towed back to the dealership and say, hey, I want this fixed under warranty. And they say, well, it doesn't cover warranty. Why? Because you had the nerve to drive your car over a pothole. While a pothole isn't something you want to necessarily driving over one, I should say, it should at the same time be something that the car can handle, much like I believe model train locomotives should be able to handle certain imperfections in the track to a certain extent. I'm not saying they have to handle all problems, but have some tolerance for it. Regardless of how well or how not so well this train tracks, the fact of the matter is this tank's profile is too big, and it is not photorealistic for it to be this big. It should not be this big. There's no excuse for it being this big. And therefore, the performance of this locomotive is simply unacceptable, and Atlas really needs to get its act together with its quality. So I must, in conclusion, as much as I wanted to love this locomotive, I can't. And as for this locomotive, the only way I'll be running it from now on is with its fuel tank off, and I'm pretty much not going to buy any more of these engines. However, I will be buying some Dash 8s. I've already acquired a few more of the 2003, 2012 run units. I never had many of those as I really wasn't into wide cabs originally, as I really liked the wide cabs. So what I'm doing now is I'm buying more of them. I don't really like the narrow cabs. I picked up 2 of them, and I actually have scavenged one of them for its DCC and sound decoder because it's too late for me to return it, and I'm probably just going to keep the other one as a part source because I really am disappointed with the performance of these engines, the fact that they bottom out on everything. And to be honest, I have so many of these Dash 8s with the narrow cab that I really don't have a need to keep one of those going. The same story with these wide cabs. I can get the 2003 version. I'll just stick with those. They only came out with 2 BNSFs in the script paint scheme. As much as I do like those engines, and I do actually have one of them on my layout, but I think it's sitting right over here. And here it is, number 516. Again, the fuel tank is too prominent and bottoms out on the actual tracks. You can't even see the rail ties. Pretty much completely useless because, again, it can't make it around my track without bottoming out. To the point where you might as well have a push train or a string attached to it because I literally have to walk around the tracks and give this thing a push every so often, or in some cases if it gets badly perched enough on the actual joining areas of the ties, I have to literally pull it off the tracks and move it someplace else. So in short, I concur with my fellow YouTubers that have trains with Shane, etc., that Atlas's quality is pretty much a hit or miss. And this locomotive series of wide cabs, etc., with their prominent fuel tanks, with sound or without sound, clearly is a miss. And that's going to do it for this review. I don't really have anything else to say because it's not going to be pleasant, so I'm not going to say anything else. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Please like and subscribe. And as always, keep the metal side down.